So often we hear phrases like, you need to just have a little more faith, and it makes faith feel like a to-do list item. But faith is a noun. It's something we hold and have. It's not something that we hustle for. It's a gift, a spiritual sense that allows us to perceive what our eyes can't yet see. So today I want to share something with you that came to me on one of my recent walks. And it's a simple picture, but it spoke volumes to me. I usually walk where I can see the mountains. They're tall and somewhat majestic and beautiful. But on this morning, there was a thick layer of fog. I knew the mountains were still there, but in some places I couldn't see them at all. And then in other spots, I could see their outlines, but they were hazy or unclear. And that's when God began to speak to me. I never questioned whether the mountains were there. I knew they were. And right there, God reminded me of what it means to walk by faith. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen." So let that settle in. Faith is a substance. It's evidence. It's not just an action. It's a thing we have. So often we hear phrases like, you need to just have a little more faith. And it makes faith feel like a to-do list item. But faith is a noun. It's something we hold and have. It's not something that we hustle for. It's a gift, a spiritual sense that allows us to perceive what our eyes can't yet see. And that fog that I saw that morning, it reminded me of what it's like when we know that God has placed something in our hearts and we don't see how it's going to happen. We might catch glimpses like I did of the mountains through the fog, but other times we can't see it at all. The fog could be our doubt. It could be our need to understand. It might be the busyness and the distractions that are, clouding our minds. But the truth is, just because you can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. The mountain, the promise, the dream, the direction, the outcome, it still stands. It still is. The fog will lift, and God knows when and how. And in the meantime, you don't have to strain to make it happen. Just like a child who hears their parents say, "We're going to Disneyland." That child doesn't ask for the itinerary, the budget, the map on how to get there. They just believe, and they trust the voice that told them. And when you begin to understand the New Testament, this new promise that Jesus gave us, you realize something important. Faith is part of your inheritance. Jesus came to remove the heavy burden and the law of the Old Testament. And instead, he showed us what it looks like to live in grace and in fullness and authority. His last words on the cross were, "It is finished." And that wasn't just about the end of his suffering. It was about the beginning of a whole new way to live, a completed work, and a shift in realms. And then here's something else to think about. Everything begins in the spiritual form first before it shows up in the physical. So if you go back to Genesis, in chapter 1, God says, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation." But then you read a little later in Genesis 2, and it says, "Now no shrub yet appeared on earth, and no plant had yet sprung up." What? Didn't God just say, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation"? Then why did it later say, "No shrub had yet appeared on earth"? And it's because creation begins in the spirit form. God called it forth before it physically appeared. And that's why scripture tells us, call those things that be not as though they were. Because when you're walking in step with God, what you speak in faith begins a process that may take time to appear, but it's already real in the unseen realm. So today, maybe there's something on your heart, a dream, a calling, a desire that God placed within you, but it feels a little bit buried in fog. You can't see how it's going to happen. You don't have the steps, the timeline, the clarity. Maybe you only see shadows or faint outlines. But remember this, the mountain is still there. The promise is real. And the evidence to that is your faith. And faith is a gift from God Himself. Just like when someone you love passes on, they leave you their things, their treasures, their gifts. And that's what Jesus did for us. The New Testament is your inheritance. The gifts of the Spirit, including faith, were left to us by someone who deeply loves us. And then if I'm being honest, the concept of Jesus's love, this idea that He loves me personally and deeply, is something that I still wrestle with sometimes. I know it and I believe it, but there's a part of me that still longs to feel it more, to know it, at the core of who I am. And that's been one of my current prayers, is that God would show me in real and personal ways just how much He loves me. And maybe you feel that way too, because maybe there's something you need to ask Him for, not just out of pressure or performance, but just with this, childlike curiosity. Because I think in this world, we will experience trials and tragedies, grief, confusion. That's part of the brokenness that's around us. But even in all of that, Jesus says, take heart because I have overcome the world. And I find comfort in that. And I've realized that anxiety, which is so widespread now, could be eased pretty greatly if we truly believed that we were fully loved and held by someone who is good even when life isn't. So if you're at a fork in the road and wondering, what to believe, I invite you just to choose the path of hope. What if it is true? What if there really is a God who adores you, who wants to give you good gifts, even while you're walking through pain? What if the mountain is real, even though you can't see it right now? You don't have to have it all figured out. Just be willing to believe like a child again. Not because you've got it all logically sorted, but because somewhere in your heart you sense there has to be more than just surviving in this life. What if love really was the answer? So here's an invitation for you today. Thank God for the mountain, even if you can't see it. Thank Him for placing the desire in your heart. Thank Him that He sees the full picture, even if it's not clear to you. And thank Him that you don't have to. And then ask Him one simple question. God, what do you want me to do today? Is there something that you want my help with? Or do you want me just to rest? And then do that one thing. Just that. Because faith isn't this frantic effort. It's quiet trust, and it's walking in step with the Spirit. It's being available for today's assignment and then leaving tomorrow's fog in God's hands and timing. And if the answer is rest, then, play with your kids, sit in stillness, take a break, get some sunshine. Maybe that's your mountain work for the day. You're not behind, you're not lost, you're just walking through a little fog, but the mountain is still there and you'll get there. Trust it and rest on that. And if this spoke to your heart today, share it with someone who's waiting in their own fog. Encourage them that the promise is real and the gift of faith is already theirs. You're not waiting to get it. You already have it.